All right. Hey, good evening. Thanks for an off night gathering here, but good evening and welcome to the July 22nd, 2025 4 p.m. work session. Please note all council members are here. However, I don't see Councilmember Myers, but I am sure he's coming, or at least we don't have word that he's not. Let's talk a little bit about any council business that we have. Do we have any council business real quick, Lynn? Are we ready to, I'm switching it up a little just only because mayor's bringing down some guests, so.
Sure. I don't think I have anything unless you all have questions about the trip. And if you do, maybe we can just chat for a few minutes after. Other than that, this will be the last meeting for, I think, 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks. So not a whole lot to talk about as far as scheduling other than the airport issue when you get done talking about that in the work session. We can talk about the schedule for that in August.
Has everybody signed up for WhatsApp and got all that going? Okay. Everybody got their euros ready to roll? Okay. Art? How's the euro thing going for you? Who's all doing the parade? We're all doing it? Meeting at the same place then?
Yeah, as far as I understand it, the golf carts will be there on 31st, so we don't have to take them from here down to there. So they should be there for you when you get there. And then just drop them off just right here where you usually do, just right behind the amphitheater. Yes.
Oh yeah, what time?
Brandon will be there and with the youth council.
But yeah, we'll be there with youth council, and we will have your name and your seat as well, and we will have the youth council help secure those to each golf cart. And then, as far as timing goes, the parade starts at 9. The latest I think you should be there is 8:30. That's what we read. I told my kids between 8 and 8:30. So. But the carts should be there well before that.
Thank you.
Yep.
For thematic possibilities of my cart, if I forward those to you, youth city council take care of that.
Might be a little late in the game for that, but we'll see what we can do.
One big cowboy. All right, well, any other business? Mayor, do you want me to get started with our other agenda? Or? Okay, all right. Hang tight for a minute or two. Angela, I took the last hour.
I had a late lunch, so thank you.
Your late lunch?
I think you should tell us what your tattoo is.
Oh, it's just some,
We'll
yeah,
tell everybody.
it's just some cheese. Yeah, it's just some like evergreen cheese. Because Olivia's going away to law school while I'm gone to Germany. So
No.
yeah, well, I'm
Where's she going?
excited for her. She's going to Boston University School of Law.
Oh my gosh, that was like one of her top picks too.
It was her top pick. She was very happy to get in.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Wait, just hang tight. One more minute. One more minute. Any other questions?
Well, instead, it'll be my last parade with you all
I know.
for the time being.
For the time being.
It's been a joy hanging out at parades together.
Yeah, that last is hard, huh? Well, then we'll put you up in front.
So, want to do the Christmas parade.
Oh.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you.
Diputado y diputada. ¿Usted también? Los diputados. ¿Qué más?
Hola.
Gracias for making a quick exception. We'll make this very brief so you can get to your planned agenda for this afternoon. I wanted to introduce our friends here at the City Council with our friends from Guatemala. A little bit of background. With some help from Luis and some community leaders here in Ogden who have connections internationally. Guilmar, the owner of Tokyo Station, grew up in Guatemala and introduced us to his friend and started to establish connections with the country of Guatemala. This is Neri Ramos, president of the Guatemalan Congress, and the delegation from Guatemala representing the Congress in Guatemala. So one of the things that we have been working on because we believe it's the right thing to do is when this introduction was made, we introduced President Ramos to the governor's office, and the governor asked if we would help establish an honorary consul for the state of Utah to the country of Guatemala. Since that time, we did a self-funded trip to Guatemala on our own personal expenses to help firm up that relationship. And President Ramos introduced us to the Department of State in Guatemala, and we sat and made the proposal there on behalf of the state of Utah and the governor at his request. They accepted eagerly the opportunity, and this delegation is here to firm up those details and to establish more diplomatic channels here in the state of Utah for anybody who comes to Utah from the country of Guatemala. So I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you guys to this delegation. You'll be seeing more of them through the week, potentially tonight at the rodeo. But I also wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you guys to our city council friends and colleagues. In our form of government, so this would be like our Congress, and I would be the president of our city, same form of government. And they're in just an informal work session, so they're casual. This is where they're doing business and doing their day-to-day work. And they're talking about a policy that we're proposing for our airport, which is very important to the economic development and the future of our city. And so we'll let them get back to that. And, but is there anything I want to say before we leave? Anything I didn't cover?
Is the former first lady of Guatemala. My husband was the former president of the country.
And yeah, thank you.
And now she's a congresswoman representative. And aquí tenemos varias familias que hablan español. Okay, tenemos uno por allá, otro por allá, otro por allá. Poquito.
Marco is our proposed honorary consul for the state of Utah. And we really appreciate the work that you've been doing to help. And in some very private and personal ways for some families in the state of Utah, Marco has already stepped in and been very helpful since we've established this relationship. To do things that we don't really want to advertise because they're so personal for the families that are involved, but are they important to mention that they are the right things to do for people. And that's why we've stepped in to do what we've done, and look forward to doing more. President Ramos has got a deep background in law enforcement, having served for a number of years, a full career in law enforcement, including his last post as Director of National Police for the country of Guatemala.
And Senator Curtis sits on a very important committee for Central American relations. And he invited he invited this delegation to meet with him on Sunday. So that's another connection that they're going to make, and that actually is has some connections and is related to national security issues between the United States and Central America. So we're just very proud and happy to be here, and we know how important it is for you to get back to your business. So we'll be going here.
Thanks, you guys. Absolutely, absolutely.
Pues primeramente queremos darles la bienvenida. Sí, gracias. Y conocemos muy bien nuestra familia, su país. Hemos estado en la ciudad de Guatemala, Antigua, Atetlán, pues por muchos. Y vi una persona llevando un huipil, ¿no? Ah, pues aquí está. Reconozco su... Sí.
Yo he vivido en México mucho tiempo. 3 años.
En el lago de Aztlán, ¿o dónde fue?
Fuimos a hacer una reunión con amigos.
Qué bueno. Bonito. Pues debe regresar a Guatemala. Debe regresar a Guatemala. Porque hay mucho que conocer. Hay muchos desafíos, pero también hay muchos lugares. Exacto. Eso sí es cierto. Te van a tomar una foto. Ah, sí, nuestro. Uy, usted sí conoce bien de Guatemala. Sí.
as far as eating upstairs and shit, so. So. That's why. So.
Well, I'm. I actually have a lot to do between now and really, so if we don't have to, I just assume not. Or we find the whole thing well gone, but yeah.
Oh. Mike with the good camera just got here. We just took a picture.
Well, you already had a pro.
Tell him to.
Ándale, ándale.
Ándale, Olivas. Vámonos.
All right, well, we'll get started a little bit here without Sean. He'll wander in here, I'm sure, soon.
Go, Sean.
You know, 456 days of Duolingo, and I can't even say, you know, get your behind in here. But I can order wine, so this is good. Thank you for your patience, everyone. If we want, I'm not sure how, I think we've got Jared coming up here. I don't know who all's coming up. So Jared, Brian, Kurt. And we've got, is it Margaret online? Is she's? Oh, they both are online?
Margaret's online.
No, I saw Kurt right over there.
Kurt,
Oh, yeah, you're Brian. You're
yeah,
Brian. Okay.
yep.
Brian. Geez, and Ryan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair White. We'll go through a couple of different, other one first. Yep. We'll go through a couple different items tonight, but we'll just kind of get it kicked off. So thank you for giving us this time again to come and meet with you and talk about this and kind of go through some of these things. Kurt will not be with us tonight, but that's okay. Ryan is. Ryan will be handling that portion of it. Brian will be addressing us first to kind of go through some airport fundamental items, and then Ryan will be diving more into the minimum standards discussion. We tried to take the questions that we received from you last week and incorporate those into these presentations to kind of go through this to help clarify. If we're missing the boat and we're not answering those, please let us know because we absolutely will answer those. We are missing a few people that I know would like to be here tonight, but they are actually back in Wisconsin right now. It is the big aviation air show at Oshkosh, which is, if not the biggest, one of the biggest aviation shows in the United States, and that's taking place right now. And so a lot of individuals are back at that. So with that, I'll have Brian come up and he's going to kind of go through the first part and then Ryan will follow up.
So maybe before you get, I just have some, I don't know, we had a lot of questions last week or that came up and maybe it would be helpful for you as maybe there's questions that you guys thought of over the week to make sure we address. Are there questions that came up for you guys as we talked last week? Any questions?
Well, I'm gonna have to.
Yeah.
Only about leases and minimum standards.
Okay. I'm sure they'll hit that.
Yeah, there's
some general overall questions I think I might have, but I think we ought to get the presentation, and I think maybe they'll get answered.
Okay.
Or I'll generate more questions.
All right.
One of the,
Well, probably
one of the
that.
material.
But,
Well-
and how would you like this? Would you like me to interrupt when I have?
Please, yeah.
I have a stupid question. I learned a long time ago that Yeah, I'm not the only one that has the stupid question, but I think I'm the only one that's dumb enough to ask it.
Yeah.
So. That works, and I'll write them down so I make sure I get them correctly. So, I'd like to, appreciate the opportunity to come back and, address this a little bit further in detail. A lot of the questions that were asked last, meeting, we had said we'd been working on this for just about a year, and that was your first exposure to it. When I first came in, we gave some airport fundamentals, which is important. And that's why we're going to start here. So I got 10 minutes to give you some airport fundamentals. And like the statement, gentlemen, this is a football. Even the experienced coaches, the players, everyone started off with the basics so they could better understand how the team worked together. So the American Association of Airport Executives, their mission is to advance the aviation industry. And the elected officials are part of that advancement. So they actually have a seminar on best practices and fundamentals of the air transportation system. And they go into the airspace, the aircraft, the airlines, and then the airports. And that's a long seminar. So we're only going to focus on the airports. But if you're interested in going in the future, I'm happy to go with you and get an in-depth focus on the air transportation network system. So how a professionally run airport is managed is by these four key areas here. No matter the size of the airport, we have the finance administration, planning, airport operations, and marketing and development. So in the previous slide, you'll notice that the elected officials establish the airport policies and that the airport administrators implement the policies of the elected officials. So that's important for you to know. The policies that you implement or changes to minimum standards, that's what we will enforce at the airport for the betterment of the airport. Planning, operations, and public relations are all as detailed as administration, but we can cover those at other times. So again, no matter what size of airport we operate, there are many, many different airports. So the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems are airports that are deemed essential for the national air transportation system, and they're available for federal funding. So you can see there's 3,000 airports, about 390 of them are commercial airports. The rest are general aviation airports, or about 124 commercial airports that don't have at least 10,000 passengers a year. So they fall in the non-primary category. For commercial airports, we have large hub, medium, you can see all that. And then also the passenger amount. So you need approximately 8 million passengers a year to be considered a large hub. 2,450,000. This number fluctuates, that's why it's an approximation. 10,000 passengers a year is the mark to get into the commercial airline fund, the pool of money for there. So if we have 10,000 enplanements, passengers a year, we get a minimum of $1 million from this $8 billion fund for non-hub airports. If we go down to 9,999, our guarantee is 150,000 out of that $0.18 billion. Now you'll notice that the small hub airports only have 6.6 billion, but they're dividing that by 74 airports, not 252. So there's a lot of non-hub airports. So Ogden, we need to know that, is a primary non-hub airport and grant eligibility. If we're going to promote commercial air service, we want to make sure that we stay far away from that 10,000 passenger mark. Exceed that, because that, in 10 years would be $10 million. So we have hit that last year and this year, so we are eligible for that guaranteed minimum of 100 million. 100 million, yeah. Great. I do work for the government, so you like to exaggerate things. A million, but that's the minimum. So it could be 1.2, 2.4, whatever our projects that are approved are. And this information is from the latest NIPIUS report that can be found online. So current Utah airports that are commercial service airports. Salt Lake is our primary large hub airport. They have 12,000 passengers a year that get on at the Salt Lake Airport, so the connecting flights don't count. They count as passengers, but not enplanements. Provo is up there, and these are the 23 numbers. I don't know what 24 is, and obviously we're not done with 25. So you'll see Provo with 415,000 and Ogden with 15,000 are both considered primary non-hub airports. So we share that pool of money with these other airports. But since they have more enplanements, the amount of funding you get directly correlates with your passengers. So everyone, why does Provo get all the money? Well, we've got 50 times the passengers we do. So we want to stay in this category. And Wendover, I'm not sure if they fell off the list, and I tried to find the numbers, but was unable to.
I've always scratched my head because 20 years ago, Ogden was a bigger airport than Provo. What happened? What happened? You weren't here.
No, but I read the state report. Basically, it said that Ogden Airport was an afterthought and run by unaccredited airport executives. So they did what they thought was best for the airport.
And I guess that at least the next question is do we have potential to catch up? Or are we just behind?
Yeah, that's the other discussion, but we are way behind.
Yeah.
It will take us, my estimation, 3 years to get all of our documents and the culture changed. Probably 6 years before we can begin to tap our potential as an executive airport, which I'll get to a little bit later.
Thank you.
It's a long process, and the previous culture, it's absolutely fine. That was what the direction was. Previous administration did what they were asked to do, and now we're asked to come in and make a professional executive style airport, and this is the first step in that process. So hopefully you're all here long term, except for someone who's not running, but she can watch from the sideline and be a champion. Yeah. So understanding that Ogden is a primary non-hub airport will help us make decisions for the rest of our master plan and addressing the state audit reports. So both the master plan and state audit say the mission of the airport is to promote general aviation, commercial air service, and economic development. Our vision is excellence in infrastructure, high quality. I mean, you can read all this. The core values are safety, security, and service, and set by those different organizations. So the first one of our mission is to promote general aviation. We do this by reviewing, modifying, and enforce our primary management documents. We have a private hangar development area reserved just for the local pilots, because the corporate and the businesses could come in and with discretionary funds, the local pilots couldn't compete with that. Enhance our infrastructure, participate in the aviation groups that are at the airport, provide responsible education and training, which is huge, and then improve our communication with the local pilots. Next, guess what question I get asked most from the public? When is the next airline coming in? When's the next service? When can I fly here or there? So as part of promoting commercial air service, we need to understand our primary non-hub airport status. So there's different classifications of airlines: legacy, low cost, ultra low cost, and the regional carriers. The legacy carriers are up there. They have full service. You get the most amenities. They have the biggest share of the market, and they have multiple fares. The regional airlines are the feeders to the legacy carriers. Usually their routes are between 300 to 600 miles, and they'll take them from a non-hub airport to a hub airport. The low-cost carriers, now Southwest, they're vacillating between a legacy and a low-cost, but for the purpose of this, I put them in the low-cost carrier. They offer basic services, They're point-to-point networks. They have limited amenities, and it's a simple fare. They have value-based. They'll give you the best value and the most comfort for the price. Then we have the ultra-low-cost carrier. They're the bare bones. They will get you from here to there with one personal carry-on bag. They're a destination, point to point. So they don't normally go to hub airports. That's why you don't see these ultra-low-cost carriers at hub airports. The amenities are a la carte. That doesn't mean you can't get the amenities. In fact, I'm flying out of Breeze on Friday, and I asked about the amenities. I'm like, well, that's still less expensive than the neighboring airport. Well, I'll do that one and I'll do that one. So I've added the amenities, so my flight will be similar to what I could get out of Salt Lake, but without the head. It's more convenient to for me to go out of the Ogden Airport. And it's the lowest fares you can get, and it's a cost-driven business analysis. So with that, how do you attract a new airline to your airport? There's 3 factors in the airport. The city only has control over one of them. We don't have control over the passenger demand. The airlines are looking for year-round market-driven analysis, proximity to airports. The airport, our non-primary status, we are presently attractive to the ultra-low-cost carrier. So if we're going to go market somebody, we wouldn't go to a legacy carrier. Why would they spend money investing in the Ogden Airport when they've already got all the infrastructure 40 miles away? The appropriate terminal and parking facilities, which we are getting the terminal updated. And the next issue I believe we're going to have in the next 3 to 4 years is parking. We're going to run out of parking for our terminal. So we're already in the plans to address that. And then the airport can control costs and incentives for the airlines. The incentives are there to get the airlines started. They're not intended to be long-term, but the city gets to determine what long-term is. 3 years, 4 years, 20 years, I don't know. As long as we get more than that 10,000 passenger mark, we're doing good. Then the airlines, the ultra low-cost carrier airlines, their aircraft utilization. If you'll notice the other airlines that left here, I looked at their load count numbers. Their passenger count numbers were very high. So, well, if they were very high, why did they leave? Well, maybe their airplane could be utilized at another market and generate more revenue. So we just can't look at passenger count. They look for underutilized direct routes. So their competition is not like the legacy carriers who give you the global network. These are more local and regional airlines. So they don't compete directly with the hub airports. They do price elasticity, so they will change their price to create more demand. So if the price goes up one day or down the next, it's to create more demand, and they survive on the extra fees. So that's how we're going to attract commercial airline service, focusing on our part, enhance the terminal, look at parking, beautification, and that's what we are doing. Economic growth, this one's important. Promote commercial aeronautical activities through minimum standards. That's the manufacture, repair, and overhaul, this aviation operators. There's a strong growth potential in large private hangar development at the Ogden Airport. We're strategically located to become an executive airport. So executive airports are in close proximity to large hub airports. And there's a list of many, many executive airports in Illinois, Texas, Virginia, Florida, South Carolina, Nevada. Idaho has an executive airport. Atlanta, and again in Florida. An executive airport is tailored to commercial and or the executive business aircraft. And Ogden is listed as a reliever to Salt Lake. So our proximity to Salt Lake Airport puts us right in line to become an executive airport, to attract the larger aircraft, the airlines, the ultra low-cost carriers, and bring economic development into the region.
So is Scottsdale kind of one of those executive airports? I'm familiar with that one, so I'm trying to get my mind wrapped around that. It's close to Phoenix, Sky Harbor. It's
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And you're saying that looks like a good fit for Ogden?
our location is we're a reliever now, but if we're an executive airport, that brings in more of the economic impact to northern Utah, not just to Ogden. You guys are doing a great job supporting northern Utah, so thank you very much. But it would definitely bring in a different investment set and generate the revenue that the city is looking for. Again, this is one of the many things that needs to be addressed, and we are addressing all of them. And then, if you'll notice, the FAA has given us extra money this year, and the state has given us, millions of dollars extra this year to help us with our economic growth. So the state and the FAA are behind the airport and our new path.
Brian, can you, for me, paint a real distinctive picture? What is an executive airport? What do we see flying in and out of an executive airport? What kind of airplanes? Who are these people? Where are they going? How long are they here? That sort of thing.
An executive airport is a cultural experience where the staff knows their profession, where the airfield is maintained, where the equipment is maintained. The airport has gone through many years of deferred maintenance. And we're talking about capital projects. On the operating side, I've done a 6-month status of the airport and presented it to the city staff, and it's not very good. But we can look at that later if you're interested. I think that's one of the recommendations, that we come to the city council annually and provide you with a status of the airport report, which hasn't been done. Once that's there, then are the facilities. Does the airport look like an executive airport, or like the Sanford and Sons, which is, I've been told it looks like, lot out there? What's the visual appearance of the airport? You show up to the airport and you see rust on a hangar or weeds. What message does that send to the potential customer? Well, if they're not maintaining the paint, what are they doing with the runway or the fuel farm? Are they maintaining their fuel farm? Are they going to put contaminated fuel in my aircraft? So the services of an executive airport, we are open 24/7. This last year was the first year Ogden did not close because of a snowstorm. Again, we didn't have very many, but I'm still proud that we didn't close because of a snowstorm. We didn't have one diversion because of a snowstorm. We changed the procedures to the snow boss training you get back in New York. Every year they have the updates on how to maintain and open your runway.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you. That's what an executive airport looks like. Who does it attract? I don't know what an executive plane is.
It attracts all three of the mission: the local pilots, the aeronautical businesses, and the jet and turbine and manufacturing businesses. It attracts all of them.
Okay.
Now, some executive airports focus only on the jet traffic, and they displace the local pilot. But that is the market, that's the direction that they've been asked to go.
Yeah, that isn't what.
So our direction is, how do we promote all three? And that's why the strategic plan, we have the area where the Group 1, that is reserved for local pilots. No commercial operator can go in there or build a large hangar. The commercial area in the center is good, adequate for the next 20 to 40 years. We can do, 3 million passengers out of that area a year if we improve the parking, which we're not even close to, not even Provo's close to that. Then the area on the west side is for the large hangar, the large development, that area over there. So this strategic plan accomplishes the mission of the Ogden Airport. And that brings us to the primary management documents. Now that we have that baseline, we go to the primary management documents. And as always, this is just one of the 4 key items that we're working on. The operations, hey, where's my gate? That's the operations. We need to be operationally efficient and proficient at the airport. And that's it. Now we'll turn the time over to Ryan and be happy to answer more questions now or at the end.
Any other questions before you?
Thanks for having me back. Excited to be here again this week. I know Kurt was hoping to be here, but he's in Oshkosh and actually had a meeting with the FAA administrator today, so he was doing some important work. I've got a PowerPoint presentation that's getting pulled up. We also have some tenants here from the FBOs. So if there are questions for Garrett or Corey that are with the FBOs here at Ogden, they'd be happy to take questions and answer questions on minimum standards or I think really anything related to the airport, their commitment to investing and developing the airport as well. All right, so with that, I'll kind of pick up where Brian left off. I know there was questions on executive airports. And I think one of the key things Brian said starting off was it's really the elected officials of the sponsor that set the strategic vision and direction of the airport. So it's your job to tell the airport where to go, what to do. And then it's the airport management that carries out that direction on the day-to-day basis. That's part of what we're doing here with minimum standards is that document will help to establish what direction the airport should go and how that looks. But of course, that gets really detailed, and we'll kind of get into some of those details today of what, how do we want the airport to look? There are design guidelines that we'll come back to later on. Brian had the slide up there of all the different documents. There's a number of those that will help set that strategic vision and direction for the airport. So with that, I also wanted to make sure that we understand the clientele of the airport, I think is what you're asking about, right? So we talked about the broad vision for both general aviation, business aviation, and commercial aviation. A lot of times when you are trying to attract business, just general economic development for the community, the people that are making those decisions are flying in on their corporate jets. And when they get off that jet, that's their first impression of your city. And so that's like rolling out the red carpet for them. What they see is really that first impression of of the environment that they're walking in and the city that they're looking to do business with. So I think that's another important consideration is how you want the airport, not just physically look, but how it operates and what potential it has there. So getting into minimum standards now, kind of where we picked up last time. The document itself is structured relatively simply. We've got 5 sections here. I'm going to walk through these with a slide or two in each one of these, and also try and answer some of the questions that came up after last session. So one of those questions was, what are other airports doing when it comes to minimum standards? So I made some phone calls today, and I talked with airport directors at Provo, Salt Lake, Cedar City, and I've reached out to St. George as well, but didn't hear back from them. So when you look where they put their minimum standards, Provo is the only other airport that has a municipal code. And they actually did just go and do an update earlier this year. Matt Jensen is the director of operations out there, and he said that it was really, the update was kind of forced on them because they were having some issues. They had not been updated in 15 years. So it was time to do it. That was part of the motivation to go to city council and update minimum standards. But they're also having some issues I'm going to bring up as a really good example of why you would want to have the flexibility in minimum standards. Talking with Tyler at Cedar City, he spends about, he'll go back to the city council 2 or 3 times a year just for minimum standards. They're quite engaged with their city council down there in running the airport. And so again, it's just trying to find that balance of how engaged you want to be with the airport strategically and then operationally. The rest of the airports, you can see they have administrative policy. Many of these are out of date. And part of that is just trying to understand the discretion that you allow the airport to have in applying the minimum standards that you've established. You notice that even the administrative policies, most are adopted and amended by city council. So even though it's not in ordinance, it's still city council's purview to adopt and amend those ordinances or the policy that's there. All right, so going deeper into that, just an example of some of the issues that we would deal with in trying to respond to and update minimum standards. Responding to emerging industry trends, there's a few of these that we've seen right now. Some we're trying to address already in this draft, others we just don't have enough information to be able to make an educated decision on how it should be addressed. So for instance, UL94 is unleaded fuel. In aviation, unfortunately, we still use leaded fuel in all of our avgas, except for unleaded 94 fuel that's come out recently. at UVU, we use 100% unleaded fuel. So we're one of the few adopters in the country that has exclusively switched over. Not all aircraft can use it, but most of the aircraft can, and so we were able to do that. There are conversations of, particularly in the state of California, where they're essentially trying to control airports and restrict activity by regulating the fuel that aircraft can use. If we force them to go unleaded fuel and there's not enough fuel around, that's going to impact activity. So how do you address both unleaded avgas and sustainable aviation fuel, which is essentially like a jet fuel equivalent of that, in minimum standards? You know, most minimum standards will specifically call for 100 low lead, which is the avgas fuel we use, or a jet A. We've generally defined it in this document as avgas or jet fuel. It's giving that breadth to be able to make decisions. But at some point in 2030, and this is one of the things Kurt was working on today, he chairs something called EAGLE, and I can't tell you what that stands for, but it's the FAA's effort. So he's the co-chair with the FAA to convert over to unleaded fuel by 2030. When that happens, you're going to want to specify that the airport and the operators are required to sell unleaded avgas. So that's one example. Vertiports are another. We're seeing the FAA came out with an advisory circular on vertiport development. If you're not familiar with this term, it's a new one that was recently kind of made up to address AAM, for advanced air mobility. So this is the idea, the Jetsons concept of flying. They look like large drones where you can fit, 2 to 4, maybe even 8 passengers in. Airports are starting to incorporate vertiports in their design. Even FBOs are having vertiport parking. We will accommodate AAM. They anticipate it coming, even though it's hard to tell when it'll be here. That's another one of those where you'll need to respond very quickly. It's not something you can write into minimum standards, but you may have an FBO or another private terminal developer that wants to come and do development at the airport. And then again, there's nothing that exists to be able to do that. Another trend that we've seen, and we've started addressing minimum standards, are limited service FBOs, where you have operators that don't necessarily want to meet the full requirements of an FBO and don't want to serve the same clientele. So when we come in and do minimum standards, often we'll find that there's a fixed base operator, and I put that in quotes, that is primarily serving the GA market, the light GA market. So they're only selling avgas. They're doing, maintenance primarily on aircraft under 12,500 pounds would be considered the threshold for heavy and light. So if you think of like the small flight training aircraft, those are your type 1 aircraft that these limited service FBOs are really geared towards. And it makes a lot of sense in an airport where you're not selling enough fuel to justify business for 2 FBOs, 2 full service FBOs. And the full service FBO really wants to focus on jet aircraft because that's where the money is. But you also have a market where, or an FBO that is happy serving the light GA market, and that's their clientele. And so by creating a category within minimum standards for a limited service FBO, you can essentially allow both of those to continue to exist or encourage one even. So we're working up in Heber where they're looking at doing something like this, that exact same scenario. You've got an FBO, full service FBO. There's not enough room or demand to support 2 full service FBOs there, but the small GA community would like to see more services geared towards their needs. And so they're, in the future looking at a possible limited service FBO. Regulation and guidance is constantly changing. I mentioned AAM. We also have eVTOL, which are your electric vertical takeoff or landing aircraft. So they kind of group into the same category there. We're also seeing grant assurances becoming more politicized. The grant assurances I talked about last time they're constantly changing. So I mentioned there's about 40. They're adding more of those in there, forcing local governments to comply with federal policies and guidelines that have nothing to do with aviation. So that's becoming more controversial, and it's requiring airports to be able to quickly adapt to those grant assurances that are being put out there. You also have facility and service requirements that change. I mentioned a few last time with maintenance. You know that you have these fast teams that are working on the larger aircraft, and you have a lot of specialized aircraft manufacturer service facilities. You don't have the more not one-stop do-it-all type maintenance facilities that people will bring their aircraft to. You just don't have the demand to support one, let alone multiple of those on most airports. And so being able to adapt to that, we also talked about TNCs, transportation network companies. So those are your Uber and Lyft. Those services have really placed the need for having to require FBOs that have courtesy vehicles. Part 121 is another thing I mentioned as well, where as your air carrier service changes, the need to satisfy and support new carriers or expanding service may change, and you want to make sure that the FBOs are required to be providing those services to the satisfaction of the airlines that are serving the airport. You also have to allow flexibility to attract and respond to investment opportunities. I know that Garrett Online has wrote a letter that's really kind of addressing this, wanting to invest more in the airport, but making sure that that investment's protected, as we talked about. I know he's happy to address any of those questions if you do have questions specifically for him or for Corey in terms of their, because they co-wrote that letter, I believe, just trying to address the concerns that they have, making sure that they can protect the investment that they want to make in this airport.
All right, Ryan, can I ask a question about our current service level?
Yep.
Do we have a full service AMP, AI facility out there, radio, navigation work, anything like that?
Good question.
Are those things like we used to? I just don't know if it's still there.
That would be a question for Brian to answer. No? Okay, I didn't think so. We're working on a comprehensive list of all the SASOs, so those individual specialized operators, to understand what is existing on the airport, who is certified to be doing business and not. So
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. But I'll make another question that kind of came
yeah,
up.
absolutely.
You know, you were talking about the difference. Well, you know, the reason we're having this discussion is to move some of this stuff into the administration policy.
Yep.
And they're able to wiggle with that. But you were talking about these other airports that their city council is very involved and they're always in the city council. And why isn't that a viable solution for Ogden?
It absolutely is. It really depends on how much time you want to spend on airport issues and how much discretion you want to be able to give the airport to make decisions.
Well, I think, you know, you kind of explained that there's some ways to give a general minimum standard that then can be, you know, the specifics then can be exercised by the administration. I don't have any problem with that.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what we're talking about? Really? Or is this something broader than that?
As we get into the details, I think that'll help you understand a little bit more in terms of what we're doing. The proposal, I would say this is more towards that side, but as we work with stakeholders, users at the airport, to understand what it is that needs to be in there to address the specific issues for Ogden, it may become more specific where you're going to need more discretionary. So
yeah. Well, that's, you know, you know, the questions I have really are for our current stakeholders. I'd kind of like to get their opinions. So, but I appreciate you taking those questions.
Absolutely. And like I said, we've got Garrett Online, Corey's in here if you want to ask them any questions on the FBO side, at least.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
You know, I mentioned the last bullet point I have here is really reducing the need for zoning minutes. So the more strict and specific you write the ordinance, the more likely you're going to have to come back. It's something like you'd see with a zoning code amendment, right? Where there's something that comes up where it doesn't quite fit into ordinance, and then you come back to city council to make that change so that it will comply with what is in there. The best practice I put here, when I talked with Shane at Salt Lake, I asked him, you know, what was it that got you across the finish line with Salt Lake City Council? Like, what was the message that really resonated for them to decide to move minimum standards from ordinance into administrative policy? And he said it was really this idea of doing an annual report by the airport where they'd come back to city council once a year and report on the changes that they'd made in minimum standards, if any, and any issues that they're facing that they anticipate having to make changes in the upcoming year. And that still gives the city council the ability to pass resolution or ordinance to be able to direct them what they want to see in that administrative policy. You talk about Tyler at Cedar City as well. He said they actually have a city council member that sits as a representative on their airport board. That board's advisory only, but at least they've got city council that's constantly reporting back. I think that's really similar, I see, to having somebody that represents planning as well. You know, so it's similar issues like that. So it's just trying to find the right fit for what makes sense with Ogden going forward, particularly with the number of issues that are coming up. I know the airport hasn't been front of mind for the council for a long time, but as Brian indicated, there's not just these documents, but a lot of development that's anticipated. And I know Garrett and Corey both said with the Olympics coming up, less than 10 years now, there's a lot of infrastructure and changes that are going to have to take place to be able to accommodate that so that Ogden can take advantage of the full opportunities with that. So I mentioned discretionary authority in the last slide. I point out a number of times here where it's mentioned in the current draft that we have, right? So it just talks about the discretion of different entities. It generally references the sponsor. I think we'd probably like to get more specific in terms of who within the sponsor, whether it's airport director, maybe an administrative role here in the city, or the council that has that discretion. And so just, the references here are to the different sections within minimum standards. The first one is revising minimum standards. So like we saw with a lot of the other airports where they have administrative policy, but they have to go to city council to approve or amend that. That's an option here where you can say that the airport has to come back to city council and present another document that would then be approved or amended. Some other examples, and I'll run through this list unless you want to spend more time on any one of these topics. But just, I think this is probably where you need to give the airport more authority to be able to determine what constitutes the acceptable minimum and compliance, because a lot of it just says adequate. And adequate is not very specific, but sometimes needed to be able to deal with the scale of different operators. I use flight training as an example because it's the one I'm most familiar with, but you can have a flight school of 5 aircraft and a flight school of 50 aircraft. Very, very different size operations. What's adequate in terms of classroom space for both is going to be very different. And so even if you set the minimum small, that's not going to be adequate enough for an operator 10 times that size. So being able to give the airport director the discretion to say, yes, that's an acceptable minimum, or if things change, are they out of compliance with what is currently acceptable? And then the ability to waive minimum standards for commercial aeronautical activity. So if you have somebody that's proposing a new operation that doesn't meet the current minimum standards, are you willing to waive that, and who's got the authority to waive that standard? In some cases where the airport has more discretion, it relieves the need to come back to city council. And that's why you see some of these that haven't been updated since 2008, like St. George, because while the minimum standards are out of date, they can still get by doing waivers and having that discretion. So in some cases, too much discretion may allow the airport to not have to go back and make changes in minimum standards, which could create problems from the grant assurances we talked about by creating opportunities for unjust discrimination among similarly situated operators. You also can do waivers for specific instances. I skipped over one, sorry. Determining minimum standard violations. So if they're not in compliance, what are the enforcement actions you're going to take? Also waiver for government or public service. So these are kind of like one-time emergency relief type waivers. You also have permanent waivers for non-commercial Part 91 activities or military activities. Who has the authority to deny an application? So if somebody does apply and they're reviewing that application, who makes the decision on whether it meets the minimum standards that are required to establish the business? And then also approving more than one specialized aeronautical service. And this gets into insurance requirements as well. There's some overlap with Chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3 is commercial activities, that's under Title 8. Chapter 4 is minimum standards. Those two really overlap to a point where I'd say probably half of your Chapter 3 belongs in minimum standards. The other half is more leasing policy. And so we're going to have to, as we address those, dance around it piecemeal by chapter even. So getting into some examples of this, just section 1 introduction, as I mentioned, talks about the purpose of minimum standards. Specifically, it gets into self-service, and the FAA says that you have to allow aircraft owners to be able to provide services on their own. You can't force them to use the services that are provided on the airport. They have to be able to do some kind of basic maintenance and even fueling on their own aircraft, which can create some problems, particularly if you don't have good fuel storage and handling requirements and rules and regulations. Self-fueling is a concern. You don't want people storing fuel cans in their hands. That's obviously a fire hazard. We also don't want everybody to have their own fuel pump. That's a problem as well. And so addressing that in minimum standards, really addressing that in rules and regulations is important. You don't have to give everybody the right to self-service, but they have it's a protected right by the FAA, as long as they meet the standards that you set for those things. the way that we establish this in the current draft is by saying you have to meet these airport rules and regulations. Of course, those are something that we're going to have to do at the next step and get updated. But just an example of how this plays into shifting minimum standards. We've had a number of instances. Salt Lake was one, also working up in Portland, where you have developers that want to come in and build a large hangar or a series of large hangars, executive type hangars. So if you've been to Provo lately, you've seen all of these very, very large hangars that have gone up in the last 10 years. And they have large corporate jets, almost the size of small airline jets. They're great tenants. They always pay their bills on time, and they never, very rarely haggle over price. And so there's a lot of demand to be able to build facilities that accommodate those operators. There's a new business model that's emerging where people that do just property development, kind of like Kurt does, where you're building these facilities, want to provide additional services to their clients as part of the incentive to move into their hangar. Some of that is fueling. They want to be able to fuel their own tenants. So are you going to allow tenant-based aircraft services? FBOs would not want to see that because that's taking away from their business. But it's a service that the commercial hangar operators want to provide because it's a benefit for their clientele. And so trying to find the balance of where are you going to allow this or not? And it varies. So in Salt Lake, they said that they didn't want to allow that. Some airports say, we'll allow it under a limited service FBO, right? You don't have to meet all the requirements of a full service FBO to sell fuel, but you're going to be providing limited services, and here's the requirements that you can do. Other airports say that we're going to allow commercial hangar operators to do this because we don't want another full service FBO. So the instance we were working before, there were already 3 full service FBOs at an airport that is around the size of Ogden. Having the other developer is willing to meet the requirements of a full service FBO, of which the airport would then have to prove them for that. But there's not enough demand to go around to support all of those. So in that case, they said, okay, we'll create a new category just for you to be able to do that because it makes more sense that way. And as the airport evolves and grows, particularly with a fast growing airport like we're hoping to see Ogden catch up, you're going to need to be able to respond to those issues that come up like this. Section 2 is the definitions of the document. I brought up a few key definitions here just because I know there are questions on these last time. I won't spend a lot of time on this here. And while I'm thinking about it, I know that, I don't know how much time we have because I know that I'd heard there was rumors of wanting to get out early. So if I go on too long, just let me know that you guys have had enough and we can always come back another time. But, aeronautical activity, okay, thank you. Aeronautical activity or an aeronautical service is really just anything that involves the operation of an aircraft. What makes that a commercial activity is that it's for profit. I talked with those commercial hangar operators. That's one of the challenges in balancing it. When does a hangar operation become a commercial activity? The current minimum standards in Title 8 right now say the subletting of a private hangar is not a commercial operation. It just leaves it that broadly. So if you have a 20 or 30,000 square foot hangar and you're subletting that to a dozen aircraft, is that a commercial operation? Those are the kind of intricacies you have to try and anticipate and if not, be able to respond to. Operator is the term that we use for any kind of commercial operation, right? If they're providing a commercial activity or commercial service, we consider them an operator. Those are broken down by FBOs, those fixed base operators that are the gas stations providing a lot of different services versus a SASO that's providing just one service. And then owned is a really important term for aircraft because when we talk about that self-service, it goes back to, do you own the aircraft? Because if it's the owner or employees of the owner, they can provide self-service. You also see there's through written agreement with an aircraft owner. There's what we call Part 91 Subpart K, which is fractional ownership. So you can buy a 1/16th portion of a jet. You're an owner of that, but it's under management with a different company. Because they are essentially through written agreement, can they do maintenance on their aircraft? Generally, yes, right? That's a commercial operation. Can they fuel that aircraft? That's where it gets a little bit more questionable, right? Do you want those type of operators to be able to have self-fueling rights on a fractional ownership, for example?
Can I ask you?
Absolutely.
So let's say I'm a flight training facility.
Yep.
I got 10 airplanes. I'm not an FBO. Can I still fuel my own planes?
Yes, because they're owned or leased. So at UVU, we have our own 10,000 gallon fuel farm. That's where we're able to do unleaded fuel. So you
Okay.
can't buy unleaded fuel commercially at Provo, but we tinker it in from Ohio and put it in our own fuel farm.
So that does work.
It does work. Yep.
Okay, great.
Ryan?
So ATP at the airport, our biggest flight school, they applied for a self-fueling permit. They got the insurance requirements, the vehicle requirements inspected, and provide that. So they self-fuel their own fleet of aircraft, but each aircraft has to be owned by them and they have to use their own employees. So they can't share with another aircraft owner. They can't donate, gift, barter. That fuel has to go in their aircraft with their employees. So it's happening at the Ogden
So
Airport.
do they still have lease-backed aircraft? I mean, other owners lease the aircraft to that flight school? Or do they own their own airplanes?
They own their own airplanes.
Okay.
Oh,
But would it
either-
work if,
Either own outright or through a long-term lease, which is a year or longer.
okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah.
This is the issue right here that brought Provo to city council to amend their minimum standards after 15 years. Because you have Duncan Aviation, which is a large MRO maintenance facility, one of the largest in the country. They service the very large executive jet aircraft.
Started in Nebraska, just in case you guys wanted to know.
Yep, they are. And they were selling fuel to their customers. And it was kind of an well, I wouldn't say under the table, that makes it sound shady, but they had talked to the airport and said, we want to be able to fuel our customers' aircraft so they don't have to taxi across the airport or across the runway to get to the FBO. And the airport said, sure. They started pushing that to where you had customers that were flying in that had work done there, but were just in Provo, then going over to them to get fuel. And obviously the FBO didn't like seeing that. And so they went to, that's where they went back to update minimum standards because of an issue that was occurring at the airport where they wanted to make it clear what was allowed and what was not allowed. And again, that own definition there, even though they're allowing that Duncan to service and fuel their aircraft, I guess you could say it's through a written agreement with an aircraft owner because they're doing maintenance there, but that's even kind of a gray area whether you'd want to allow that or not under the FAA's definition of what owned is. I apologize for these ugly slides. I only had a week to put stuff together, so I was dumping text on slides, but I don't expect you to read all that. I bring this up just because even in the draft that we have, looking at this, we want to make sure we do what's right for Ogden. This basically says that if you're going to provide a commercial aeronautical activity at the airport, you need to have an operating permit to do so. And, right now, I want to say there's 40 something, you said 43 operating permits for commercial businesses at the airport. Of those, I think Brian said that 7 have a commercial lease, meaning they have a facility that they've shown meet the commercial requirements by city code for parking, fire code, access, all of those issues, right? And so the challenge is not just having an operating permit, but also having a lease that meets a facility that meets commercial requirements by city code. And so we want to say that it's not just an operating permit or a lease, but you have to have both. You have to have you have to have an operating permit, but you also have to have a lease or the permission of the airport director. And this is one of those discretions to be able to be an independent operator that does not require a lease. And so we list the 4 different types of 4 different options to be able to satisfy that by just making that change. So you essentially strike that language from 321 and add a sentence in there that says authorized for commercial aeronautical activities by the airport director. Some other, issues that come up under these general requirements. So section 3 is the section where you address requirements for all operators, whether they're FBO, SASA, or independent operator. Non-aeronautical use of facilities for commercial aeronautical activities. This is a controversial one. Land at airports is subsidized, like we talked about, from the federal government, so it's very cheap, much cheaper than what you'd find in off-airport storage. And so if you have a hangar, it's often the case where you're going to try and sneak a boat in there, store it under the wing of the aircraft. extra cars, RVs next to the airport, on just anywhere on the airport you can park them. That becomes very problematic. The FAA tried to take a stance where, like it says here, shall be used exclusively for aeronautical purposes. There was pushback on that, and the FAA said, okay, we'll leave it up to the airports. So there's not a lot of backing from the FAA to enforce this, but most airports say it has to at least be primarily aeronautical use. When it comes to commercial operators, I don't think you'd want any kind of non-aeronautical use there, particularly because the FAA says that any land or facility for non-aeronautical storage must be at fair market value, FMV. And there's a whole policy with guidelines on how you appraise fair market value for that area. Whereas aeronautical use is market rates, and you have a lot of discretion how you set that and what methodology you use to establish market rates. So if there's non-aeronautical use going on in a hangar and they're being charged aeronautical rates, now you're not in compliance with those grant assurances. When it comes to personal use, there can be a little bit more latitude on how you want to enforce that. But again, it's a slippery slope. The more you let it go, the harder it becomes to keep that under control. So when it comes to minimum standards, which only apply to commercial operators, I think you'd really want to keep this to exclusively for aeronautical purposes. But there may be cases that come up where it may make sense for an operator that has even a temporary need to be able to do some kind of storage, where you'd have an agreement where they're going to pay the non-aeronautical rate, which is, I think right now set at 4 times the aeronautical rate in order to use that space. Subcontract required and permitted services. In general, we allow operators to subcontract any of the required services that they have to a subcontractor to meet those. The best example of this, and I know that Corey and Garrett brought this up in their letter, was maintenance. Right? As I mentioned, there's oftentimes not enough demand to support full maintenance shops at both FBOs. Sometimes you have one FBO that provides it, the other one is subcontracting their work to them, so they're kind of working together to meet that. Other times it may be an independent third party that they're subcontracting to. So just giving the ability to be able to subcontract work. But again, that requires the written consent of the airport director or whoever you delegate that authority to. And the reasons for denial, that in this section, we have a long list of why you would deny an operator. It's often the case where you can't think of everything. And so you may need to update minimum standards quickly to be able to add in a loophole that somebody's discovered or an issue that you've identified in approving things, particularly as the needs and services evolve with, for instance, vertiports and AAM operators that you didn't see.
That brings up another question.
Yeah.
I am really sorry.
No, I love these.
So I've got a hangar in my airplane and I want to bring in an off-airport AI mechanic to help me do an owner-assisted annual.
Yep.
Is that the kind of thing we're talking about, or?
Yes, so that's self-service of an aircraft, right? You're the owner, even though you're not doing the work yourself, you've hired.
Yeah, they're going to sign it off. They're going to do all the testing, but I'm going to open it up, close back up, all that.
Now, the next question would be, are they permitted to be able to do a commercial aeronautic activity at the airport?
That's the question.
So they would have to go to Brian and get a independent operator certificate, essentially show that they've got insurance. They don't need to have a leasehold, right? But they need to show that they meet insurance, that they've got the correct certifications from the FAA to be able to do the work and that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so again, small text. I apologize if you can't read this. The idea here is just showing a table with FBO minimum standards, both proposed and current, right? So the right-hand column is what you currently have in Title 8, Chapter 4. The left-hand column is what we have in the draft that we supplied last week. This just gives you an example of how different the recommendations that we have are to what's current. And just because we're recommending them doesn't mean that that's the final. For instance, leasehold. We'd say 5 acres is pretty standard for an airport, a non-hub primary commercial service airport. I don't believe both FBOs meet that 5-acre standard. So we may say it should be 3 acres instead. Even still, though, the current 25,000 square feet for a leasehold with 10,000 square feet of structure, not only is that inadequate for what you need to be a full-service FBO, you don't even have enough space really to move aircraft out of that hangar and around your leasehold, let alone for parking, green space, those types of things that you typically have. The storage requirement, so the structure has to be 10,000 square feet. There's actually no storage requirement other than 2 general aviation aircraft. It's a very broad definition. Whereas we're saying 30,000 square foot structure, 25,000 square feet dedicated aircraft storage with a 5,000 square foot terminal. The letter that Corey and Garrett sent, we're arguing for twice this, 60,000 square feet. Again, those operators want to make sure that that those standards are high to protect that investment that they want to be making in here. And so we'll go back and look at what makes the most sense. Is it 45,000 square feet or something in between there? One of the more challenging issues is the door size. So for the type of aircraft that serve this airport, you typically want a door with 28-foot clearance to be able to get the tail inside. Neither of the operators have that right now. And you can't, I mean, you can lift the roof of a hangar. It's been done, but it's really expensive to do. And so this is a hard one we want to establish a 28-foot door height as standard because that's what makes sense for this airport. But how do we bring the FBOs into compliance? Generally what we're saying is you have to have a single structure of this size that meets those requirements. So they could build future buildings to be able to do that. That's one of the options, but that's where that stakeholder engagement piece really comes in to find out what's the best way to make sure that we're meeting the airport's needs, but also not asking the operators to do something unreasonable. That's going to be hard to meet. Fuel storage, right now, it doesn't specify the grades of fuel like we talked about. It just says 2 generally accepted grades of aviation fuel. I mean, I talked about what those are today. It's not an issue because everybody expects Jet A and 100 low life, but it doesn't really require that they even have jet fuel. You could essentially be providing 100 low light and UL 94 and they'd meet the requirements. And the storage is adequate, right? There's no tank size. You know, here we're recommending 20 and 10. In talking with the FBOs, they're even 20,000 gallons is pretty low for the amount of volume that they do. And I think in their letter it said 30,000 gallons. That's one that I think we'd easily say, yeah, that makes sense. You typically do about 85, 90% of your fuel volume in jet fuel and only 10% in avgas. So logically you'd think, well, we only need 1/10 of that fuel storage in a tank. Why not do a 30,000 gallon avgas tank? Well, fuel shipments come in 8,000 gallon shipments. So you don't want to go that small because you don't want to be taking less than half of a tank of fuel. It makes sense to have at least a minimum of 10,000 gallons.
Okay, another question.
Yeah.
So doesn't the city own the fuel farm?
I don't believe so. I think the requirements are, yeah, that both FBOs have to have their own fuel storage facility.
We do? You're saying, no, we don't. Yes, we don't, right?
No.
There we go. We do not own the fuel farm. So the FBOs own their fuel farm.
Okay, how do we get?
Or they lease the property and own the tanks, but.
Okay, we get a chunk of their sales though somehow. That's why I thought we probably owned it.
We get fuel flowage fee.
Yeah.
So off of all the fuel that they sell and that they flow through, we do have money or revenue that we generate off of that.
Okay,
And
But we don't own the fuel.
Yeah, the
farms.
fuel flowage fee is.
I've
more
always
like a-
assumed that that they must get it from us somehow. Okay, great.
It's more of a user fee that's passed through the FBOs, right? So think of it, a fuel flowage fee is a fee that's charged to the users of the airport that's collected by the FBOs and then remitted to the airport.
Right.
Rather than for use of the facility.
So, but we're good. So this storage thing is for everybody that sells fuel.
If you want to be a full service FBO, you need to meet that requirement. Yeah, and full service FBOs are the only ones that are allowed to sell fuel commercially to the public.
Okay, thanks.
Fuel equipment, right now it only says you have to have 2 300-gallon trucks. The minimum that we'd recommend is probably twice that for avgas and 10 times that for jet fuel, 3,000 gallon tanks. Yeah, I put 1 in there, but that's 1 operational of each type is the minimum you'd want. You can even go as far as to specify 2 trucks, of which at least 1 has to be operational at all times or something to that effect. Self-service fuel is another issue that we talked about. I know Brian would love to see the FBO providing self-service fuel, but you don't want to have 2 self-service fuel tanks. And so do you require that minimum standards? Is it really a minimum that you need to see? Probably not. Are the FBOs willing to do that? Yeah. Another option is to have the city provide self-service fuel for avgas. There's plenty of times where you see that the FBOs don't really care to be selling the avgas because it doesn't do the volumes and the margins aren't there. And they're okay with the city stepping in and providing a self-service fuel tank. So those are some of the considerations. I think the business hours in the current standards specify ATC hours. We're just literally saying 7 to 8 p.m., which is what the current hours are. After our response time is not specified in the current standards, but we say that if it's outside of those hours, the FBO needs to be able to be on call within 1 hour to service after a request. And then staffing levels, right now it's just one properly trained person. Generally, there should be, during business hours, there should always be, 3 people on site at a minimum, with two on the ramp, 1 in the office to answer phones and deal with customers, and 1 manager that's there 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And then when it comes to maintenance, you want to have at least a minimum of 1 A&P 40 hours a week during the week. So that's essentially the requirements that we've established for minimum standards FBO. Again, we're taking feedback from the FBOs on this, engaging with them to make sure that we're meeting their needs, but also making sure the users at the airport are getting the services that they need as well. Going into SASO, the next category, these are the different types of specialized operators that you have that provide one individual service. I've got 2 highlighted here that I want to go through in particular. In general, these don't have to be very different. Even though the operations that they do are very different, the requirements can be pretty general to meet these. And for example, we'd say the leasehold to do any one of these is sufficient to accommodate all of the operator's activities. With a single hangar that can accommodate the total number of aircraft to be serviced by the operator, a door height, capable of getting those inside, something to that effect. And then an apron that's 100% of the size of the hangar. So you can essentially pull all of the aircraft out of the hangar onto your own ramp on your leasehold without impacting any other users of the airport. But we can also, for each one of those, get more specific. So as we talk about skydiving operators, a very specific one. Right now, I don't believe it is addressed in the minimum standards at all. But you do have a skydiving operator who is permitted. And you'd want to have some very specific things around skydiving operations, particularly with the safety aspect, where they're dropping onto the airport. Tooele also has a skydiving operation, so when we did minimum standards there, we addressed this as well. And these are the requirements that we put into Tooele's minimum standards. So there's already a precedent established in the local area. The good thing is there is an industry association that puts out guidelines on this, and so you can really reference those. But then there's other things like leasing the space for a drop zone at the airport, and even collecting not just a fee for the lease space, but for their operation, because they can be very disruptive. And so that's the fee itself is something that you'd establish in your consolidated fee schedule, but requiring that fee could be done in the minimum standards, make sure that they're paying that. And then also the properly trained personnel for those as well. Another operator that's unique, I mentioned the commercial hangar operators. This is a challenge that we've seen, and it varies depending on how airports want to address it. The challenge with this is that even with a small hangar, if you have a hangar that you leased ground on and you built, and you're then leasing all or part of that hangar to a third party for subletting, is that a commercial operation? Many airports would say yes, and they want to at least collect some of the revenue that's being generated at the airport and keeping that in that closed financial system that we talked about. Other airports say it's fine if you sublease, things happen. You may not be able to, you may want to keep your hangar, but you don't have aircraft to store in there, something to that effect. At what point does that become a commercial operation? And so the way we address this in the draft, we say that SASOs engaged in this activity that meet the definition of a commercial hangar operator must follow these requirements. And then that definition says that if you construct, lease, or own a single conventional hangar of more than 5,000 square feet or multiple hangars of any size, you're a commercial hangar operator. So even if you have two small hangars, that makes you a commercial operator, and you're leasing that space out to somebody else. So in this case, if you have your own hangar and you're leasing that out to somebody else, not a commercial operation, unless it's more than 5,000 square feet, which is I want to say like a 50 by 50, but my math might be wrong. I think it's a 75 by 75 size hangar. So pretty large hangar there, or multiple hangars of any size. Then you have to follow those minimum standards, which often require you, the current minimum standards say that you have to submit 5% of your gross receipts back to the airport. That's a really high percentage, but there's some revenue that can be collected from those commercial operators, whether it's a fixed fee or percentage based or a tiered system, depending on how you want to do that. So there's value to the airport in establishing and capturing some of the revenue that's generated from those commercial hangar operations. So that's essentially the draft that we have in a quick review. Any questions I can answer now? Or questions on next steps?
Just a question. So when was the last time those design standard or those standards were last updated?
20 years?
20 years. And so I guess, I mean, I think I'm convinced that, yeah, we do need to make some adjustments in a lot of these cases. But then I guess the next question is, do you anticipate there being a lot of need for flexibility going forward with what we've just talked about? It seems like we're bringing it up to a certain level that feels like, okay, now we're maybe more current with things. But I mean, is this going to really change in 6 months or?
I would like to respond to that.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Brian.
So the state audit pointed out that there hasn't been an accredited airport executive at the airport.
Right.
And Glenn has gone through this twice. So I understand everything he's saying, and that's my language.
Right.
That's why we gave the fundamental overview
Sure.
of it. And I review the primary management documents every year with the tenants and come back with a recommendation so they don't go stale. Rates, fees, and charges need to be looked at every year. The cost of goods goes up. The cost of runway de-icing goes up. How is that captured in the fees? The definitions change every year with the FAA. The definitions change. So we want to make sure we're consistent. So once we get this set up, if we do have an annual report, which I recommend, hey, the city council can say, hey, here's the changes. Are they enough to warrant a small correction, or do we want to wait 20 years and do a massive correction from 4 pages of minimum standards to 38? That's the progress that I would recommend every year. We have a return and report of the primary management documents. And again, that's just one facet of running the airport, the administration side.
So on the slide, it does say, I got the date wrong because the ordinance was 2005, which I believe is correct. So it's been 20 years. But to answer your question, getting
I
these
think
updated.
the question for me is, because we're talking about moving it to administrative instead of in municipal code. Isn't that correct? Everything we just talked about?
Yep.
So if we make this update, which hasn't been done in 20 years, in the next year, what we're updating, how many changes would we anticipate there being?
Yeah.
And needing that flexibility.
So I think the main focus needs to be just getting it updated, right?
Sure,
It absolutely has to
sure.
happen. I think what you see in Cedar City is probably more reasonable, 2 to 3 visits a year, probably in minimum standards issues, just because of the growth that you're anticipating at Ogden and the changes that we see in industry. So it'd probably be, I'd say at least every 6 months, if not more frequent than that, to come back for small changes. They wouldn't be substantive changes, but it would require time.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
I do have a little anecdote that last time I remember doing much of an update, there was some requirements in there that flight training facilities, they had to have the VCR available to do the things, and people, they did have a VCR that they had to go blow the dust off of, but nobody used VCRs anymore.
Yeah.
So there's things I think like that probably could absolutely be put someplace else.
Yeah. And again, how specific do you want to get in it too? I mean, we've had airports that want to request that all operators are required to have public Wi-Fi access in their facilities. Not a bad requirement, but you get specific like that and it can be, it can just snowball into more changes in the future.
So underneath all of this,
Mhm.
am I correct in understanding that ceding legislative responsibilities to the administration for policy changes is going to save time?
Yes.
How much time? So let's say there's a change to minimum standards that needs to be addressed. And it's going to come to city council or it's going to go to the administration. There's going to be some process within the administrative realm as well that is going to involve time.
Yep.
Okay, so what are we looking at as far as response times to a needed change in our minimum standards?
How quickly do you need to be able to respond? Is that the question?
Well, what's
Or
the
how
difference
much-
in time? If this is an emergent need,
Mhm.
how much more quickly is the administration going to be able to address it in their process versus the process of addressing ordinance with us?
Jared, do you want to try and answer that one? Because I don't know local.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's a fair question. Depending on what the situation is, this is somewhat of a guess, right? Depending on what the situation is and what we're dealing with. But if we had a situation that we had to react to because of changes in the aviation industry or business climate or business changes out there, if you have an administrative policy, you're looking at the potential of going through quickly identifying what the issue is. Here's what we recommend the updates to be. And that might be internally, could be a week, maybe week and a half, 2-week process. Where right now, when we come before the council, we prepare those transmittals, we turn them in, we get on the work session like we're doing here. And then, depending on your scheduling and how full you guys already are, when will we get on that schedule? And so those are not always within our control. And I know you guys are fantastic at helping us get there as quick as we can, but sometimes that can be a month or longer before we can actually, sometimes present. And so sometimes that works and would be okay. There's other times that it might not be flexible enough, depending on if it's a business venture or something like that that we're trying to address or follow up on.
Jared, can you give us an idea of what kind of a thing might be urgent that would require a fast turnaround that we would normally see in Title 8?
Like something happening out in the airport,
Well, yeah,
driving the
I mean,
thing.
the kind of things you're talking about. Say we really need to deal with this quicker than going through the city council process. I mean, what kind of things are we talking about?
I'd say number one right now, and we're experiencing this, right now, is business opportunities, right? So you have opportunities that want to take place out at the airport. They're looking at our standards, they're looking at our ordinances, and they're going, sure, we'd like to invest here, we'd like to do a project out here, but
This won't work.
not with those rules, because it's not a level playing field.
Mhm.
And so those would be probably the most driving ones, would be like business type of things that are commercial business items that are being, again, because the minimum standards those are affecting our commercial operators, right? Not the local GA, not the local pilot. Those I would point to, probably those would be the biggest item. And then there are fluctuations. Ryan actually talked about quite a few of them, kind of going through his slides and things like that. But there's a lot of things we are seeing, especially right now. This last year has been crazy with changes just at the FAA level. From top to bottom, all of the individuals that we work with, from our ADO over in Denver all the way down to our local planning representatives at the FAA, the entire organization that we work with, that we're required to work with at the FAA, entirely brand new people, brand new names, brand new requirements. All of our projects that were previously approved went back into review. Some of them got rejected and we had to resubmit and rework through those. So there are, the reason I'm bringing that up is there's constant changes at the FAA level that affect these different things. One of the things that we're getting hit with a lot right now is the eVTOLs, VTOLs and eVTOLs, and what does that look like? State Division of Aeronautics got a lot of money this last year to invest into airports specifically for charging stations and to start gearing up for eVTOLs and those different type of uses. And so
when they come out with their program, and say, here's, what you have to do to comply, it may or may not affect some of these rules, and we might have, and if we want to be eligible for those funds, we need to be able to pivot quickly. That's not a guarantee that we would. Those are just examples, sometimes some of the things that do happen. Okay, you and I had this discussion personally, but I think it might be well to have it here too. So once we get our 2004 ordinance updated to 2025, and it's current, and we have more industry-wide standards, at that point, then what are we gonna need to deal with urgently?
Yeah.
So again, we review all of the primary guidance documents. Minimum standards will change maybe once every 3 years. But we review it each year, which is important. The previous airport reviewed the FBO minimum standards with the FBO. They signed off on it every year. Guess what happened when competition came in? What did the FBO want to do? Oh, we want to raise the minimum standards. No, your opportunity to do that was before we had another request. Rules and regulations are the one that changes the most. They change every year. So we had an increase in jet traffic mixed with the small aircraft. And jet traffic are authorized to use breakaway thrust to start the wheels moving. So I saw that, put it in the rules and regulations. Jet aircraft are authorized to use breakaway thrust. Small aircraft, it's up to you to see and avoid the jet aircraft. Guess what happened 18 months later? Student pilot taxied right out behind the jet. They did breakaway thrust and flipped that aircraft over. Now, since we had the rules and regulations, who was responsible for that? Not the jet aircraft. The pilot in command, the student pilot, was responsible for not being aware. The access to the airfield is something that changes. The speed on the ramp, right now it's 10 miles an hour. I don't know where they got that. I can't drive 10 miles an hour. Isn't there a song like that?
55.
Oh, 55, there we go. I think it's more appropriate for 20 miles an hour. So those are the little changes that we would go to the airport tenants with. Also, on all these documents, the FAA requests and requires that before you make any change, you take it to the airport tenants, so they're not surprised. Oh, you did what? You changed these? We didn't know about it. That's why I have airport user meetings. Hey, how's this working? What do you guys see for these rules? How can we improve it? Or what rule don't we need anymore? We don't need a hard line or rental cars because we have Uber and Lyft and Hertz is on the airfield or Enterprise. Those are the annual changes that we make. As far as the development standards for the hangars, that changes depending on code. So how close are we going to allow hangars to be built together? Do they need a firewall? Who maintains the area around the hangar? That's all in development standards. Once they're done, they're pretty much set. That's why if we just look at them every year, they're just small tweaks. But an example of the process that we're going through right now, my recommendations for all minimum standards were submitted March 25th of this year. We made our recommendations to increase the rates, fees, and charges to capture more of that market. And now we're not going to look at them for another 2 or 3 months. So we've lost 9 months of adjusting our rates to the market to recapture that cost that you guys are giving me. Thank you very much for all that support. But we need to share that cost with the tenants a lot quicker. And that's an example of the process it takes to get by having them in ordinance instead of policy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think maybe I'll ask another question if that's okay, Chair. I think it's probably one that we as a council probably unitedly hold is, if next election cycle comes and we get a mayor that doesn't like airplanes, I don't know, it just doesn't think this way, he sees it as a problem for Ogden or something like that, and he or she, yeah, they, them, okay. And so, but all the discretion has been moved, you know, have to kind of claw it back, isn't it? I think that's probably my concern is I think we've been, but I guess I shouldn't say that because we obviously haven't been very responsive. You submitted something in March, but I think,
To administration, not to you.
yeah. So if you know, when Breeze was coming in, they say, hey, we'd like to come in, but we need this and that. I think we got right on it, got that done. I guess that's just where I'm trying to find, well, where is the balance between what needs to be done quicker than that? And still, I kind of see this thing as we've got to put the structure in Title VIII, and maybe some of the details can be moved, but the structure's got to be in Title VIII. And you know, the skeleton of this thing has got to be there. So that's kind of that's my thinking anyway.
I think that I have a similar perspective in that, I mean, I haven't been on the council as long as some folks, but I guess my concern is that, I mean, I heard a comment that we haven't been as interested in the airport or we're not involved. That's absolutely not true. I think in my perspective, we've been waiting till the new leadership comes on board and does this process with you all. So I don't think that we're not interested. I think that also it's very challenging for me as a council member to relinquish all of the power, I guess I would say, because I feel like we've been sold several times that we're on the right track at the airport. And I totally have confidence in everything you're saying. It's not my expertise area. I have confidence in administration, but I have similar concerns as like we've been sold several times that things were going the right direction. And I'm just not ready to say, I totally trust that that's in place. And then not to anybody's fault. I don't think that's here right now, but it is a huge concern of mine, the airport and everything that's happened out there. And so, you know, if there's some way that there's an in-between in this changeover, that feels more comfortable to me than just saying, oh yeah, I'm totally on board with just moving everything over to that side. So that's just my feeling.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You know, it's okay. You got your thought.
So I brought this discretionary authority slide back up to show you that a lot of the discretion is in section 1. And you know, section 2 is definitions, which we had already planned on putting in ordinance. And so you could probably do essentially like a purpose statement in section 1 that contains what we've got in the draft there. Definitions is going to go into its own ordinance. And then really the requirements for all operators could go either or. But then when you get to the specific FBO and SASO requirements, that could really be something in administrative policy, because that's probably more likely where you're going to see the actual changes. And I think you'd want to have compliance and enforcement actually in ordinance, because that's something where you want the legal weight of having ordinance there. So yeah, I think piecemealing this may be an option where you don't have to do all one way or the other way. I think, you know, another option is what we see here, where you have administrative policy, but when you go to that 1.1, it has to come back to city council to approve that document to be revised. So there, I think there's a couple different ways to meet that. To try and answer the question that was going around earlier, I think it's not just how responsive you are, but also the amount of time it's going to take to respond. So an example of where you need to respond really quickly, for example, sale of a business. It may be conditional on minimum standards being updated. And it's not just the time of the approval process, but also the time it takes to get to the approval process of engaging stakeholders and making the changes in the document to be able to come and bring it for approval, where that's just adding on to the amount of time to that total responsiveness. And then the amount of time it's going to take for council to be comfortable in approving those changes.
I think along those lines too, kind of going through, one of the things that maybe we haven't demonstrated well, we're not asking to remove Title VIII in its entirety. We showed a slide last week that might have been a little misconceiving in the sense it looked like we were saying, let's take all of Title VIII and put it over here. We actually were not. There are sections we want to absolutely keep in city code. And we're focusing a bunch on minimum. We're trying to bite this off or break this up into bite-sized pieces because there's just so much, right? And this was one of the biggest issue with the minimum standards that we just really wanted to start with. We also felt like it was probably one of the easier items to deal with than some of the things that will be upcoming. But we have another document that I think maybe we need to move forward and show to go through and identify and show you what we feel is appropriate and what we're recommending about what stays in Title 8 and what goes out of Title 8. Like the rates, fees, and charges and all that, we're absolutely asking to keep that in Title 8. In City Code. We want to change its location. We want to put that in the consolidated fee schedule, but that would still be something that you vote on and that you approve that we bring before you. So without having a perfect diagram to show you right now, I guess the best example is what we're asking for is that we still have strength in the city ordinance that you approve, and you're still setting standards like on what is required out there. And then we're looking more to create these primary management documents for the day-to-day operation of what's happening out there under the controls that you've kind of set. So I don't know that we're demonstrating that well, but we are looking to try to find that balance. That because the request is not to totally remove or ask the city council to remove this from your purview and not have any involvement. It's how to break down, how do you set that skeleton, that structure, and then basically kind of give us the authority and administrative policy to run the day-to-day mechanics of the airport.
Can I ask when the city engaged the consultant to start digging into this work? How long ago was that?
Oh gosh.
Last fall.
Yeah.
So nearly a
About a
year.
year.
Yeah.
I think that what I won't speak for the council, what I'm struggling with is just the language of the industry. I mean, this isn't buy a car and you get your gas at Bart's place and you get your maintenance done down here and you follow the rules of the road. This is a much more complex and complicated bit of transportation. And I wonder if it would have been more helpful if there would have been a council person or two engaged with the administration in the conversations that have taken place with the consultant about the whys and wherefores of all of this. I feel like I'm really ill-equipped to understand what's being proposed because the language is so different. This is like a foreign language to me. And to really understand what we're seeding, and that's what it boils down to, is for me, it's if we relinquish some of our responsibilities on the legislative side, where does that stop? That's a tough one because we've got a role here, and I don't want to relinquish that role at a cost to the public. They count on us to check and balance things, and that's kind of where I'm at. I just feel like I'm ill-equipped to do all this. That's why I inquired about time with either you or Brian to dig into this, and I get why I didn't get a response. It's because we were here tonight. But this is a lot to chew on, and to have been engaged earlier, I think would have been very helpful for me.
I'd kind of like to address that a little bit. I see the seven of us, and you talked about the language. That's a language we don't speak. And in order to, this kind of goes in favor of moving some of these things to the administration sides, just so that because we do hire Brian and we do hire Jared, and they do speak that language and they do understand that industry. And so it gives me comfort. I mean, I know a little bit of the language from the user side, but not from the operation side at all. I mean, I can talk to those guys a little bit, but I don't understand all of the things they do.
Yeah, I get that side of the coin as well. But neither you or I understood the language of city planning and ordinance implementation until we sat on the planning commission, right?
True.
But we played a role there, and it was an important one, and we picked up the language as a result of our immersion in it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to shirk this because it's too complicated. I want to take this on and learn from it and be sure that I'm in a position where I'm making a good decision around what makes sense in Title VIII and what makes sense in administrative policy making authority.
Yeah, I think if we are able to, through discussion with the users, the consultants, our own hired people, to, to define what that structure looks like that we do keep in Title VIII, I'm pretty good. I mean, if the policies are a reflection of the structure of the ordinance, then I don't think we have a lot of concern. You know, I think as long as the structure that we're putting in Title VIII does inform the policies, I'm okay.
I wonder.
I agree. I think that my understanding initially was that Title VIII's basically being gutted and everything.
Well, that is what the chart looks like that you're referring to.
Right.
It's like,
So
okay,
that
we
was
get
the
definitions and rates. Yeah. Yeah. I was just gonna say to Dave's point, I think that maybe if there were somebody on the committee, like we are on all these other, we don't know much about the sewers until we're on the committee or whatever, you know, like I think that that could be a possible mechanism to have people. Oh, did
I would
say-
volunteer for that in a second.
Right,
you
well,
know,
that,
Yeah,
Would
exactly.
be appropriate because that's an area where you are interested and
Yeah.
also have some knowledge about
Some language.
as a
Yeah.
user, you know, like I think that's appropriate.
Well, and I look at it as if Provo still has it in municipal code. They just like updated it. I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just looking at it very simply.
No. Maybe I'm just looking at this pretty simply, but you know, once we have that foundation and it gets all fixed and we have, you know, like a design standard and we have the heights and, you know, it's kind of the same thing that we do in everything.
Would make Ogden, yeah.
I don't see, once that's there, how much we're gonna have to change it. Every 6 months, every 3 months, that's still not a lot in I mean, we have planning things come to us weekly, so
Yeah.
I guess I don't see that it's gonna,
Well,
maybe it changes that fast.
I
Maybe it
remember we
might
were,
not.
when
What?
we were looking back in the dark ages at the junction. You know, there was a bunch of stuff and they were bringing things to us like color palettes and different things like that. And I thought, man, I don't care what color they make their building. That really isn't a design standard that I cared to participate in. But the height, the type of architecture, those kind of things probably were. And I think that this is that in my mind, you know, if we give the structure and then it, you know, the fine detail, they can handle that on a day-to-day basis based on, you know, bobbing and weaving in the industry, that kind of thing. I'm okay with that.
I agree. At first, when I first read it 2 weeks ago, it seemed like, I mean, I couldn't get past we're gonna relinquish rights, right? We're gonna give up our authority.
Mhm.
And then I think we had a conversation and I said that to you. I don't know really what authority I had because it's not like we
were engaged in that.
well,
yeah.
no, I mean, I don't remember us
Mhm.
ever taking something to the administration to make changes at the airport or to improve or to do anything at the airport. It's usually reactive anyway. So I've always thought, I'm not sure how much authority I really had anyway. I mean,
Mhm.
they came to us and we acted and moved forward. So I agree. I'm happy to hear that we're gonna keep Title VIII and we'll work through what stays in and what goes out. But I mean, I guess I want to understand more of of the apprehension from others of what it is. I mean, like the relinquishing of that authority, because I don't fully understand. In my opinion, what authority we really have. I mean, I understand that we need
Well,
that we are
apparently
the
have a
governing
lot more than we thought we.
body, and we can, you know, we set things and we approve certain things, but it's all, I mean, it's based on what they bring to us in the first place. So I'm not as apprehensive, and like Rich was saying, I feel completely comfortable. I'm ecstatic of our new airport director and the vision that they have for our airport and the willingness that they are to move it forward and to improve our airport. I'm happy to, again, I understand the argument about, well, Provo still has it. I don't understand. I mean, I guess we'll need to discuss that a little more, but sadly, a lot of those are more, sadly, a lot of those up there are in better shape than we are. And I feel like we have an opportunity to become more competitive and to become more, I don't know if productive is the right word, but to become more of a draw and more of an attraction here in northern Utah. And I feel that should be, in my opinion, I feel that should be an administrative action. Yeah, I still want to have the opportunity to review changes and discuss those changes and approve the changes that are being proposed. But for the day-to-day and most things, I guess I don't have the same apprehensions as others to allow the administration to move forward with those.
Chair, I was kind of hoping we could today. I know we're trying to be done at 6, but I think that in as much as we're talking about airport operations, I'd love to have some of our current FBOs. This is not typically, they're not a petitioner in this case. They're just a user. They're a stakeholder. I'd love to have them be able to weigh in and tell us their perspective of what is being proposed. I think they probably have had a lot of discussions with Brian and Jared already, and understand what is being proposed. I'd kind of like to get their perspective, if that's okay.
I mean, it's okay. I just don't know that we have them all here. I don't have any idea about that. And I don't know that they're all the stakeholders either. So I don't know.
I'm sure it's not all the stakeholders.
I'm not
That
sure
wasn't
that-
that wasn't my
Oh,
intent. And we've got Avflight, who is kind of new to our airport, right? Is that, maybe they're not even here yet.
Yeah, no, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
And now,
I'm Garrett. Okay. Yeah, Garrett Hain with Aflight, VP of Finance. We have, just a little background on Aflight. We have 27 FBOs throughout the country. Actually have one in Canada, one overseas. And I think just from a minimum standards viewpoint, we invested in Ogden in December of just last year. And, it's just for us, it was just the beginning, right? And we feel that, there's a lot of growth in Ogden. There's a lot of development with, Powder Mountain and Wasatch Peaks and the Lippings coming and, a number of things that, I think we feel like there's really an urgency to get moving on some of the improvements on the airport, some of the infrastructure. And, we have a lot of experience with minimum standards as far as, airports that have them in place and airports that don't have them in place. And the ones that don't have them in place, really are not good for development. And as investors, we like to invest in airports that we're already at. Do we open new businesses quite often? Yes, but we like to invest our money in airports that we're already at. We've got a couple major projects going on in Michigan. We're building a new FBO and hangar at the Detroit City Airport, the first development there that's probably gone on in 50 years. We're building a large new FBO building in one of our airports in northern Michigan. So, but we only do this when we're in a situation at another airport that doesn't have minimum standards. And quite honestly, we're potentially could depart from that airport. So we really like we don't mind competition, but we do encourage fair competition. So if we're going to invest in an airport, which we're I'll be honest, we're unable to do at this juncture in Ogden just because there isn't minimum standards. So until that takes place, we're kind of at a standstill from our investment further in the airport. Obviously, we're investing in people, we're investing in safety and, all the things that are needed, but really to advance the airport further, that's why the minimum standards are so essential to our business and, future development at the airport.
Thank you, Garrett. I think you pretty well covered most of the questions I might have had for you. So, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think any of us around here are saying that we don't need minimum standards.
No, I don't.
I don't think that's
either.
the issue. I think the issue is is just what you were saying, trying to figure out what the balance is between what we should be doing and what.
What makes fair
what-
minimum standards? Yeah.
No, not even that. What should come back to us? Should fees come back? Last week when we walked away, it was like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so I think that's.
I think Ken has some.
Like,
I just was gonna agree with that. I feel like that this conversation tonight's been very helpful. It feels like, going forward, I look forward to those conversations of, what needs to be policy versus administrative and none, I think we're all in a better position to really maybe understand that a little better. So.
Yeah, getting a little education, but I just wanted to follow up on what Bart was saying too. I think to me, the difference is like when we have people writing to us, calling us, or coming to the council, and they say, I have a problem with this thing that's happening at the airport. And we say, that's an administrative duty. And not that we're not taking ownership, but in a lot of cases, there's certain roles that we play. And if we move certain things over, then it's a very different conversation when we have those discussions with people. And I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying it seems like that gives us an out. Say, oh, it's administrative, it's their job. And I'm not saying we do that. I'm just saying like sometimes we want to do something we can't because it's not our role. And other times we don't want to deal with it. We're like, hey, it's their role, So I just think that's just something to think about is sometimes we get in those situations where we're not able to change things because it's out of our hands. And whether it's this mayor or a future mayor, they'll say, well, the council made that an administrative choice. So I'll just do whatever I want, to your point. Like it could be someone that has a policy that maybe we don't agree with or whatever, so.
Can I also just, and I said this last week, when I first came into office, the discussion around the airport was very different. The climate was very different. The conversations were very different. And I just want to recognize all the work that's been going on. And I'm sure quite a few late night discussions and maybe knock down, drag it out kind of type discussions. So very, very appreciative of that for you guys and what you're doing there. So thank you.
I just want to follow up too. I mean, the communication I am getting from some of the GA guys and gals as well. Them. Your communication is so much better. So thank you for all of that too, I think. And I think in the end of the day, I don't know enough about how these are going to affect everyone on the airport campus, but I know that there will be some people that will hate it and there will be people that will love it. And so if you can, wade through that and come to a compromise and kind of into the middle, we're going to be doing great.
The way they're talking though, I think, the protections for GA, I mean, light GA is, little GA is what I call them. And then there's big GA. While courting big GA and having their own different areas of the airport, I think that's going to make everybody happy. I don't see anybody's going to be upset. So I'm pretty happy about some of those things. I think that's going to be good.
Yeah, I'll follow up. Sorry. To follow up with what Ken said, I agree. I mean, these conversations 5 years ago were completely different. So to even have everyone at the same table, I think speaks volumes to the team we have out at the airport. And I know if every one of us had a goal, I mean, it would be to make the airport more profitable. And I believe this is, we have tried in the past to find ways to do that. And again, and those ways were maybe benefiting some and penalizing others or allowing some to do certain things and telling others they couldn't do certain things. And I don't feel that that's the tone with this. I feel it's a way more collaborative. Will everyone love it? No, probably not. But at least everyone will have a say and at least everyone will understand where it's coming from and what the benefit is to the airport and to everyone. So I like Ken said, I just applaud the efforts that have, and yeah, do I know big picture, the ramifications of the decisions we're facing? I don't, but my initial response is that we're moving in the right direction, and I think this is a good thing.
You know, I think the people that won't like it are the people that are trying to get out there, skirt the rules,
Yeah.
and make profit.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones dragging it all down. You know, raising the minimum standard, making it a level playing field for everybody that wants to serve that airport. I mean, I've been to some of these executive airports, and they are way cool. When you pull up, boy, there is somebody there meeting you, and they're ready to do whatever you want. And you know, it'd be really cool if Ogden was that. You know, and it looked good, and it didn't look like we had a shanty town out there. I mean, you know, if you've driven around there, there's some places that don't look good.
Think about my district that way.
So I'm kind of seeing. I just don't think there's going to be very many people that aren't pretty excited about the changes, about the prospects.
Unless you're the person that has to have a 28-foot high door.
Well, I'm not saying there's not some hurdles. There are hurdles, and that kind of goes to the other point that I think. You know, we're gonna do this, and we're not gonna get it exactly right the first go around. It's gonna have some tweaks.
Yeah.
And you know, so we need to be able to do that without, you know, months of talk and discussion.
The chair, if I could ask a question for Jared. So if the council agrees to the proposal to take those two chapters largely out of Title 8 and move it to the administrative code, when is that administrative code going to be ready? So is there going to be a gap between when that gets taken out of the legislative code and put and adopted into the administrative policy?
Not really. I mean, because what would happen, right? Basically, we'd just go before the council. There'd be an ordinance to remove that section. And then all the language in the drafts and the documents that we're showing you just get inserted into the format of the administrative policies.
And I guess that's my question. Are those ready to go? If the council were to adopt that change, are those policies ready to go?
For the most part, I mean, yes. I wouldn't say they're 100% like, but I mean, it would not take long to complete that. And I apologize, and I don't know for sure, but we do have Margaret. She's been on here for the last couple hours with us, and she does specialize in airport law. That's specifically what she does, and she's helping us with a lot of the questions and stuff that we do have in Title 8 and those items. And Chair, I know where our time is spent. I don't know, Margaret, if you have anything that you did want to chime in on this Title 8 discussion, administrative policy versus or city ordinance.
The only thing, and this has already been said, but the thing that keeps coming to mind is I think that if I keep thinking about the 4 pages that are in the current city code and the 38 plus pages of proposed minimum standards details. And to me, I think that's where we really can capture a good balance, right? Where we've got enough control and management, oversight, and direction at the city council level that then pushes those details and how those things get fleshed out down to the right administrative policy level. So I feel like we're not actually that far apart, that we've got maybe a framework in the Title 8 section that then would help push things to the city policy level. I see that we're really not that far apart. I think a lot of it's in the details that, as we all recognize, are going to take a lot of work to work through. So those are my only additional thoughts, and I appreciate getting to sit here and kind of learn and follow the process along.
Jared, I'll just add to what Margaret was saying too. I think the draft that we have can easily be piecemealed if we need to. And you could do a repeal and replace of chapter 4, which is minimum standards, with section 1 of the draft we have. And then you can decide where you want to put definitions in the meantime. It can go right into ordinance, and we can go back and update that as we do others. And then you could have essentially sections 3 and 4 that are administrative policy, which is the general standards for all operators, and section 4 is FBO, SASO, independent operator. And then section 5 is your enforcement, which you could again put right into chapter 4, that's the current minimum standards. And I think you probably have to repeal some things in chapter 3, commercial activities that relate to insurance requirements. And the insurance requirements, I would absolutely suggest having that in administrative policy just to be able to be more responsive with those, because those are changing a lot and they really depend on the size of operation that's applying for the business. So I think you could take what we have and there's a path to be able to do this fairly easy. I know we talked about Provo and I mentioned that they just went back in ordinance after 15 years and revised it. I forgot to say that they didn't actually update the entire minimum standards. If you look at the FBO table I showed you, they have none of that in minimum standards still. They went back just to fix the one specific issue that they had and said, you know what, we'll come back later because it's too big of a project to tackle right now. And I think that's part of the challenges with having it in ordinance there too, is it's easy to just address little pieces at a time rather than make those big changes. But I think doing a big change right now is going to really help to be able to make small changes like that in the future too.
So I guess I have a question, and maybe this is maybe give my simple mind here, but so we have a general plan, or we're updating our general plan. We also have a transportation master plan. We're not putting all the transportation master plan design standards of how we want to create and put roads and those kind of things into the general plan, because we in the general plan reference the transportation master plan. But if we change anything along the way on the transportation master plan, it just has to come back to the council for approval of a change, not necessarily go through all the nitty bitty details like you're talking about. So I guess maybe I'm just looking at this very simply, but is there a way to do that both? So, and maybe that's what you're suggesting, and I just don't understand your language as SASOs and stuff.
Yeah, I think that is the balance we're trying to strike.
So if you make an administrative policy, I want somebody to change all the administrative policy, but us to have the, hey, we made these changes and we have an authority to say, okay, those are good policies or not. I don't know if that's the balance. Maybe I'm just suggesting that. Maybe, again, my simple mind is not, maybe I'm saying the wrong thing, but
No.
I'm just trying to understand how we do it in other places. Maybe that won't work here.
And I think the one thing that's making this conversation difficult as well is because at the airport, right, we've had these ordinances that kind of guide the day-to-day operation of the airport and what it's
really
supposed to do. Yeah, it is. But where I'm kind of going with that is, and what's making this conversation more difficult is, so when we talk about these PMD, these primary management documents, we've never had that at the airport. We've never had that. There is a lot of documents that we're going to be discussing at future dates coming forward that are basically brand new, that we've never had. We have lease templates, but we've never had a lease policy. And so we have design guidelines for one small section of the airport, but not the rest of it. And so those are all future discussions, right? Lease policy and leases, design guidelines, and then the discussions, where do they live? There's going to come a point when we get to these down the road. I don't want to convolute it today, but there's going to be, I'm going to have recommendations coming forward that when we get to these design guidelines, that it is, and where it lives is a discussion still to be had, but that it doesn't live in Title 15 or zoning ordinance, that it's a design guideline specifically that is for the airport, because the airport is different than downtown, right? So we're struggling with that right now. We have businesses that want to move in out of the airport. They're internal, they're not on the street. And we're saying, well, you don't have any parking stalls, so you can't comply with the ordinance. You don't have ADA accessible restrooms. You're not accessible to the public. There's all these different things. And so there's so much stuff that we're wading through, to try to get to these to move forward. And so I get it. I understand the big question on where does it live? And that's where we need to demonstrate and show you, again, we're not trying to just totally gut Title 8 and remove it and take it away. We still want the council to have say, and we still want the council involved in aspects we need to do a better job of demonstrating and showing you what we're asking for is let us run the day-to-day operations of the airport to help it move forward. It's been stagnant for a while, and we have some great opportunities to start moving things forward. We got a lot of people looking at us right now, a lot of people that want to do things out there, but a lot of them, they look at our structure and stuff right now and they're just like, it doesn't make sense for me to, you know, to continue that. So for me tonight, that's my big takeaway is I need to be able to come back better and demonstrate and show you. And I think that's where we need to incorporate more of the discussion that we've been having on Title VIII about what we are recommending and what is presented as the best practices of what remains in Title VIII, what goes to day-to-day operations, and then what is that balance? How do we keep that so that you're right, if something happened, you know, well, not something, something always will happen, but if in current or future administrations, when they change, that they still have to be responsible back to the overall goals and objectives of what the city wants for that city property.
Jared, can I just ask a question? So we've contracted with, I don't know if it's a team or with multiple people, right? And last week it showed a document that all the different work sessions and times are going to come back to us and present. So I'm assuming that that contract is for at least another year. Is that?
Yeah. So we got a couple different things. We'll probably have to look at contract changes with AGP.
Yeah.
We've contracted with them to do a certain amount of work. Margaret, on the other hand, basically she is contract, but more in the sense of she is assuming the majority of the legal role for the airport. So our city attorney's office still has all total oversight of everything that happens at the city, still has to approve and review and signature and things like that, but day-to-day operations and different legal functions that are happening at the airport, Margaret actually, where she specializes specifically in airport law, is so contract, yes, but more long-term than just a consultant that we're saying, hey, we need you for 6 months.
Yeah. I was just curious how long we work together through this process and make sure that's what I need to know.
Well, again, this has been really helpful. What's next, I guess? We've got some timing. We've got something on the 15th, 14th, 13th. I know, sorry. I am.
I thought it was the 15th.
15th, I think.
Or the 17th or something.
No, I'm not looking I'm looking through you.
Well, August.
So
August 19th.
as far as scheduling goes, you won't have an opportunity to hear this again until the 19th of August. So Jared mentioned kind of a roadmap, and they've been kind enough to share that with me and kind of go over the bigger picture of what is proposed for all of Title VIII. Is that something you want to go over before you make a decision? You've got a proposal in front of you. Are you okay to move forward on an agenda to consider that, or would you like to have that discussion first?
It's not important to me to have all that detail.
Okay.
I don't think.
So the next opportunity then to consider it would be the 19th, since you don't have any meetings between now and then. So if you're okay with that, we can put it on the agenda for your consideration that night. But we do have time in the work session too, if you want to go over some of the kind of an abridged roadmap of that and then have that on there. If you don't feel comfortable, obviously you can table it or, extend it or whatever. But we could do that. We could have a conversation on the work session on the 19th with an option to consider.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I would prefer to have something in the work session.
But you're okay to put it on the agenda for consideration, this part of it?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other council business? All right.
Let me know if you have any questions on the Hove trip. Because this will be the last time we're all together before we're together over there.
Thanks you guys for having this extra one. I think that helped us. So
Yeah.
thanks.
It was big,
Thanks
it was
for being
good for
here.
me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank